Processing, watching. Okay. Good morning. Good morning. This is Bayview Christian Center. We're glad you're here, whether you're in person or online. We hope you'll enjoy the message this morning and that the Lord will bless you in it. So, this will be my third message on Galatians, kind of looking at chapter 3, or the beginning of it anyway. And sometimes it's hard for me on some of these words from Paul. He always chastising people, and I don't want to be the guy chastising. I don't know whether it's just criticism makes me uncomfortable if I want people to like me, but sometimes you gotta deliver the chastisement as well as the encouragement. Sometimes I think it's kind of like our job as parents. We need to let God correct us, just like we have to correct our kids and keep them on the path and keep us from wandering. The previous message I was discussing Paul's warning towards the Galatians about choosing religious practices and following the law as necessary work to receive salvation. The so-called Judaizers were teaching the new Christians that they must be circumcised to become Christ's followers. In effect, that they must first become Jews and then they could be Christians. The reality is they only need to accept God's gift in Jesus to be Christ's followers. Why is it important to correct this kind of teaching? If our salvation is something we must earn, then we are somehow in control of it, when the reality is God has made the provision for us and allows us access as long as we will receive it. In this next section, Paul is pointing out why faith is an important trait for us to receive the gifts of God. In Galatians chapter 3, verses 2 through 5. The only thing I want to learn from you is this: did you receive the Spirit by doing the works of the law or by believing what you heard? Are you so foolish? Having started with the Spirit, are you now ending with the flesh? Did you experience so much for nothing, if it really was for nothing? Well, then, does God supply you with the Spirit and work miracles among you by your doing the works of the law or by your believing what you heard? We can tell that Paul's irritated with the Galatians in this message. And he starts with the question: did you receive the Spirit by doing the works of the law, or did you receive the Spirit by believing? We must be reminded of how we came to our relationship with the Spirit. The Spirit was not given as a reward for our effort, but as a constant help to live as children of God. Maybe it's part of our fallen nature to keep trying to do things our own way and in our own strength. In verse 3, Paul asks them, having started with the Spirit, are you now ending with the flesh? How can we learn to continue in the Spirit and not the flesh? I think we want to show our Father that we can do things, but what He wants is for us to show that we can listen and follow the Spirit. Last summer I was with my grandson, and he's always wanted to show what he can do. And sometimes it's an unwise maneuver, underestimating the power of gravity, and crying and tears result in that. But one thing I did notice is over time he started to trust me and my suggestions and warnings. Not completely, for sure, but there was progress. Maybe we need the time with our Father to learn to trust Him and the sound of His voice. I still think there's the thinking in our minds that God is watching us to see if we make a mistake, instead of He's watching over us, like with my grandson, just happy to interact and see them grow. In verse 4, Paul says, did you experience so much for nothing, if it really was for nothing? Paul is reminding them of their experience of persecution because of their new faith and experiences. He is encouraging them to not let all of the experiences, good and bad, go for nothing, but they can stand with the Spirit and live by faith. He completes his point with verse 5. Well then, does God supply you with the Spirit and work miracles among you by your doing the works of the law or by your believing what you've heard? I've heard many messages on behavior and being good examples, which are important, But we get into trouble when we start thinking that we can, through those good behaviors, earn status and extra gifts. It feels like I'm getting a little tangled in some dangerous ground with this, but there's so many ways things can get misinterpreted and misunderstood. We're to live lives worthy of the gifts of God, but the meat of that life is walking humbly with our God. When we become overconfident in our ability to follow the rules, we risk pride creeping into our hearts and causing us to be unkind to those not following the rules the way we think they should be done. Some of the pushback we get from our Saved, Savage, and Pirates church kind of fits into what I'm trying to say. The churches we interact with and in local churches, they kind of see what we're doing and they're concerned and it's like, oh my God, I can't have my church going to the bars and stuff. Or they're like, this is not what I signed on for, kind of thing. But I think God loves us all, and we do what we can do, and we go out and we reach out to people and we teach them about God. But they might not all behave the same, but still we're all on the same team in the long run. I think we could all improve, but I don't think God loves or gifts one group over another. We need to watch ourselves to remain Spirit-led and not Judaizer-led or religiously motivated. The next section, Paul wants us to consider the faith that have gone before us, the faithful that have gone before us. Galatians 3, starting in verse 6. Just as Abraham believed God, and it was reckoned to him as righteousness, so you see those who believe are the descendants of Abraham. And the scripture, foreseeing that God would justify the Gentiles by faith, declared the gospel beforehand to Abraham, saying, all the Gentiles shall be blessed in you. For this reason, those who believe are blessed with Abraham, who believed. I've always been kind of a fan of Abraham and his story. Paul said Abraham believed God, and it was reckoned to him as righteousness. I wanted to spend a little time this morning looking into what he means by that and what does faith mean in this context. Jeannie said I should tell people why certain topics are interesting to me, kind of help people get engaged with the message. And I like the stories where the character's called a friend of God, and Abraham is one of those characters. The goal has always appealed. That goal has always appealed to me, maybe because I'm not a good rule follower. My mind operates differently than many, I'm sure. But I see rules as guidelines. Why is that rule in place, I wonder? What is the goal of the rule maker in trying to accomplish it? Once I understand the why, then it's easier for me to stay in the boundaries. Memorizing rules is not my thing. Probably why I'm not good at spelling, and that is a problem for me. The rules make no sense. In my opinion, don't add value trying to communicate. I've been told you're spelling that wrong, and my response is, did you understand what I was saying? Anyway, how is it we can be considered a friend of God? What did Abraham do that makes him such a star of faith? Do you want to be a friend of God? I did a study of Abraham a while back and found that he was often slow to act on the word of God. And many times he would do things like bring his father and nephew along when God told him to leave his people and go. Based on just a few examples, we can see that Abraham was not in perfect obedience to God, but he did go and he did believe. How did we get from Abraham speaking directly to God, for example, to then needing a priest in separate areas for communication with God? I was looking through some examples of that, and one explanation that kind of made sense was that once they became a nation, the priest was needed because he spoke for the nation to God and spoke to the nation from God. And that was a specific role and the reason for that. But Jesus came to restore us with the type of relationship Abraham had. At the crucifixion, the temple curtain was torn from top to bottom, demonstrating the removal of that separation. still doesn't quite explain the nature of faith as Abraham has it. Why was Abraham the one that responded to God? Does God call out to each of us with the command, follow me? Let's take a look back in Genesis and see if we can find out. Genesis chapter 12. Now the Lord said to Abraham, go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and the one who curses you I will curse. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. Okay, he didn't exactly say follow me, but he said go to the land I will show you, which seems in a way like following. Then God tells him he will make him a great nation. Now he's 75 years old at this time and childless. Seems like a good opportunity for faith to me. God further tells him that he will make his name great and make him a blessing. How would you react to such a message? Jesus, when he came along, had a similar message to his disciples, follow me. To Peter, James, and John, he said in Luke 5, and so also were James and John, sons of Zebedee, who were partners with Simon. Then Jesus said to Simon, do not be afraid. From now on you will be catching people. When they had brought their boats to shore, they left everything and followed him. Maybe faith means being willing to let go of our plans and become part of God's plan. Later in the chapter, he calls Levi in verses 27 through 28. After this, he went out and saw a tax collector named Levi sitting in the tax booth. And he said to him, follow me. He got up, left everything, and followed him. These disciples left their things and went with Jesus. But Abraham took his things with him. I think, in my mind, the message needs to be we need to be willing to let go of things that we ourselves have built. But I don't think it's a rule. God works different ways with different people. Many times I see people looking to set up rules that we can follow to please God. But it seems to me that what God wants is our willingness to seek and trust his word to us. Following rules puts us in charge. Listening to God puts God in charge. Last year I started off with a message involving Proverbs 29, verse 18, which in the King James is translated, without a vision the people perish. And I was thinking this would be a good way to start off the year, was my January message, and let's have a vision and get to it. But as I looked into it, I found out that what they were talking about is a fresh prophecy or word from the Lord, not a project to get started on. And in the Living Bible, it expresses that verse this way. If people can't see what God's doing, they stumble all over themselves. But when they attend to what he reveals, they are most blessed. I like this version. I hadn't read it before this study from there. And it kind of sums it up. If we're stumbling around in the dark, not focused on God, and then we tend to be lost in grumbling and complaining. I think, I hear a lot of stuff these days online and where all these people complaining that things are not going their way and we should change this and we should do that. And sometimes I think to them, maybe God's calling you to do those things instead of waiting for somebody else to do them. But I think also if they don't have that plan going in their heads and in their minds, and they're lost and stumbling all over the place instead of having a plan and focusing. So I think it's good for us to seek the Lord and see what he has for us specifically to do. I think there's a difference between, and when we're talking about faith, there's a difference between believing that God exists and then further seeking his plan, and then going even further by joining that plan with our lives and our effort. I think what makes Abraham the one mentioned most often concerning faith is he did take action. He did go. Took him a little while, but he did. Abraham was not perfect and made many mistakes along the way, often doing things his own way instead of trusting God. However, he just keeps pushing on towards the purposes of God. And he also gets better at listening as he goes along. Let's look at what I call the Hall of Faith in Hebrews 11, verse 6. And without faith, it is impossible to please God, for whoever would approach him must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who seek him. Do you believe God rewards those who seek him? I've heard many comments and even lessons that try to make God a being that is angry with us and wanting to punish us. To me, this speaks of a God that wants to reward us, one that is on our side. One of my favorite characters in the Bible, and it doesn't say much about him, is this guy Enoch. And he's from back in the beginning of Genesis, one of the begot people. They mention him in this Hall of Faith in verse 5. It says, by faith Enoch was taken so that he did not experience death, and he was not found because God had taken him. For it was attested before he was taken away. It was attested before he was taken away that he had pleased God. Imagine that. No death, just moving on from the presence of God on to the presence of God because he was pleased with you. In my understanding, this level of relationship is the goal, to be willing to walk with God wherever he leads. Let's look back to Abraham and see what he did in verses 8 through 10. By faith, Abraham obeyed when he was called to set out for a place that he was to receive as an inheritance. And he set out, not knowing where he was going. By faith, he stayed for a time in the land he had been promised, as in a foreign land, living in tents, as did Isaac and Jacob, who were heirs with him of the same promise. For he looked forward to the city that has foundations, whose architect and builder is God. Back in verse 8, he was called to set out. And this is the faith that we are set as a goal. When called to set out, will we set out? Excuse me. Notice that it was not easy. I'm wondering today that we're so used to easy, we may be unwilling to do things that are difficult or things that might easily discourage and turn back. I hear some of the younger people complain about experiencing difficult circumstances and challenges. And I was always told those experiences build character. I don't know that I was happy to hear that message, though. Usually my dad was telling me that. And it could be that they complain, like I was saying, because they don't have a vision. When there's a goal, the setbacks are merely speed bumps on the journey. Think of trying to train for a sporting event. In almost any sport, you have to work and train and do hard things. You have to experience defeat and hardship. But you do these things to reach your goal. Abraham was considered faithful because he believed in things yet to come, things not yet seen. The thing that stands out to me in the story of Abraham is, like many Bible stories, it's a story of God and a particular character on an adventure. A look into how things play out when we choose to follow the call of God. The story of Abraham starts in Genesis chapter 11 with the generations from Noah. Then in chapter 12, God speaks to him, starting with verse 1. Now the Lord said to Abraham, go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land I will show you. I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and the one who curses you I will curse. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. So Abraham went as the Lord told him, and Lot went with him. Abraham was 75 years old when he departed from Haran. Abraham took his wife Sarah and his brother's son Lot, and all the possessions that they had gathered, and the persons whom they had acquired in Haran. And they set forth to go into the land of Canaan. What is it that God is asking Abraham? Does he still ask such things of us? He tells him to go from what you know to what I will show you. How hard of a message is that? Would we be willing to go? I try to imagine what might have been going through the mind of Abraham. Let's kind of take a quick summary of his situation. So he's 75 years old, no children at this point. He's being asked to leave all he knows to go with a God he may not know. The place he left was known to worship the moon, but he was a descendant from Noah, so I'd speculate that there were some stories that were passed down, and he had some awareness of God. He was actually 10 generations from Noah to Abraham. And the promises of God to Abraham were no small promises. He promised, I will make you a great nation. He promised, I will make your name great. He promised, I will bless you. And he promised, you will be a blessing. How would you react to such a message? I'd be pretty excited about all of that, but maybe still a little worried about the how part of it, especially being now 75 with no children. His son was born to him at age 100, 25 years after the promise was made, and 9 chapters full of adventures with God. I remember hearing all the old radio ministry series where the story would be about someone who'd gotten themselves into some sort of terrible mess and then decided to become Christian, and everything was smooth after that. I'm not sure that's the way it works out. While God promises to be with us through it all, I find it's not always smooth sailing. There are often challenges and trials to go through. I sometimes wonder why we choose so often to learn things the hard way. Like those Galatians, after some spiritual revelation and experiences, we turn back to running things our own way, in our own strength. Seems kind of like a missed opportunity to discuss Abraham without discussing his willingness to bring Isaac to be sacrificed. And it's a tough message, and I'm not sure I'm going to do total justice here, but let's take a look. Genesis 22, 1 through 19. After these things, God tested Abraham, and he said to him, Abraham, and he said, Here I am. He said, Take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains that I shall show you. So Abraham rose early in the morning, saddled his donkey, and took 2 of his young men with him. His son Isaac, he cut the wood for the burnt offering and set out, and went to the place in the distance that God had showed him. On the 3rd day, Abraham looked up and saw the place far away. Then Abraham said to his young men, Stay here with the donkey. The boy and I will go over there. We will worship, and then we will come back to you. Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it on his son Isaac, and he himself carried the fire and the knife. So the 2 of them walked on together. Isaac said to his father Abraham, Father, and he said, Here I am, my son. He said, The fire and the wood are here, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering? And Abraham said, God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son. So the 2 of them walked together. When they came to the place that God had shown him, Abraham built an altar there and laid the wood in order. He bound his son Isaac and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Then Abraham reached out his hand and took the knife, to kill his son. But the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven and said, Abraham, Abraham. And he said, Here I am. He said, Do not lay your hand on the boy or do anything to him. For now I know that you fear God, since you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. And Abraham looked up and saw a ram caught in a thicket by its horns. Abraham went and took the ram and offered it up as a burnt offering instead of his son. So Abraham called that place, The Lord Will Provide. As it is said to this day, On the mount of the Lord it shall be provided. The angel of the Lord called to Abraham a second time from heaven and said, By myself I have sworn, says the Lord, because you have done this, you have not withheld your son, your only son. I will indeed bless you, and I will make your offspring as numerous as the stars of heaven, as the sand on the seashore. And your offspring shall possess the gates of their enemies, and by your offspring shall all the nations of the earth gain blessing for themselves. Because you have obeyed my voice, so Abraham returned to his young men, and they arose and went together to Beersheba. And Abraham lived at Beersheba. This story shows Abraham's loyalty to God and God's willingness to provide. When God makes the request, Abraham responds with, Here I am, and does what's asked of him. This is a man who has waited 100 years to 100 years of age to get a son, the son of promise from God, and the one to fulfill the promise of descendants and a nation from Abraham. The subject of this story, as I understand it, is, are we willing to put God himself above the promises? Is God the object of our worship, or is the gift he has provided for us? I can't even imagine such a request and having the trust to carry it out. This is another time when God has asked Abraham to go, and Abraham goes. How could we live this kind of faith today? What things or people might we put between ourselves and God? As he leaves his young men to go up to the mountain, he tells them, We will come back to you. This kind of assurance is displayed several times in the Bible. And one of the instances that comes to mind is when Jesus is with his disciples crossing the Sea of Galilee, found in Mark 4. Starting in verse 35. On that day, when evening had come, he said to them, Let us go across to the other side. And leaving the crowd behind, they took him with them in the boat. Just as he was, the other boats were with him, and a great gale arose, and the waves beat under the boat, so that the boat was already being swamped. But he was in the stern, asleep on the cushion. And they woke him up and said to him, Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing? He woke up and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, Peace, be still. And then the wind ceased, and there was a dead calm. And he said to them, Why are you afraid? Have you still no faith? And they were filled with great awe and said to one another, Who is this then, that even the wind and the sea obey him? The point I wanted to get to on that story is, he told them we're going to the other side. And they doubted it when things got rough. But when God or Jesus says something's going to happen, it will happen. And I think it's part of building our confidence in him. Part of what I'm trying to understand or learning to understand about this life in the Spirit, it's not promised to be all sunshine and roses. There will be difficult circumstances that test our faith and our resolve. But are we willing to stay the course even in the storm? Even if we're asked to sacrifice what we think is our key to success? What if our success is simply to walk with our God? Here's some instances of that walking with God that I like to keep in mind. From Micah 6:8. He has told you, O mortal, What is good? And what does the Lord require of you? But to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God. In Proverbs 3, trust in the Lord with all your heart, and do not rely on your own insight. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make straight your path. Many, I think, turn away if things get difficult. And why is that? And what does Abraham have that keeps him willing to go ahead when asked? The kind of faith Abraham has is one where he talks to and listens to God. And he does, and he goes based on that relationship. We know, having read the book, that God fulfills his promises. He does bless all through Abraham and his faith. I think Paul tells us back in Galatians in 3, verse 7, therefore recognize that it is those who are of faith who are sons of Abraham. We are sons of Abraham by our faith. We are part of the promise and part of the blessings to the world through faith. I feel like I've kind of wandered around in this message, but the message of faith is what weaves the whole Bible together. The kind of faith that takes action, the kind of faith that listens and obeys. I know God has plans for each of us to be part of his kingdom and part of his blessing to those around us. Sometimes we need to pause and listen for our own word from God, and we can count on him to provide. That's my message for this morning. Thank you for your attention. We have communion this morning. We do our sign off, and we thank you for joining us. Please share this with your family and friends. We can find the audios of this and all of our messages on bayviewcc.org, on Facebook Live at Bayview Christian Center. YouTube video can be found at Bayview Christian Center. Wednesday nights, we're in the middle of a series called Guardrails by Andy Stanley and facilitated by our Pastor Chico. That's at 7. Free Pizza Sunday's coming up. When's our next Sunday? The last Sunday of the month. I think we got 2 more this month. Memorial Weekend. Okay, and if you'd like to give to Bayview Christian Center, you can text GIVE, G-I-V-E, to 281-559-6580. That's end of our message for today.